Actually, Jerry, or not.
That's the clock I saw when I walked in.
Kellen says 10:33 about.
Yeah. Roger says
Dallas. That's
9:33.
Alberta.
Well, thanks, Gary, for making this easier. You don't have to go through a bunch of bylaw stuff. Motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Moved by Councilor Kip, seconded by Councilor Fuller. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Adoption of minutes of October 4th.
Did you wish to chair?
Sure. I'll go with the vote back. Move adoption of minutes. Somebody seconder? Second. Okay. All in favor?
We're being filmed.
Yes.
This is
All right,
what
so
got-
now we've adopted the minutes from the inaugural meeting of October the 4th. We do have a presentation, of course, and we have some unfinished business as well, but that said, I would like to pass this to Mr. Mima to introduce our presentation.
Thank you, Chair. We are going to have a presentation from SGW Management Consultants. We have asked them to work with us to implement one of the core services review recommendations around improving our purchasing processes and updating our purchasing policy. I have presenting to you this morning Mr. Stewart Wright and Mr. Paul Warren, and I'll let them introduce themselves as they go through their presentation. There will be a time for questions at the end, but I'll let them run the presentation. Maybe in between you can ask questions as they go forward. The intent of the presentation is to give you, as the Finance and Audit Committee, a roadmap of how we're going to approach making the update to the policy as well as the changes we make to the purchasing processing. Thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thought what I'd start off with is give you a brief introduction to myself and our company. SGW Management Services was established in 2007. I am the principal. My name is Stuart Wright. I've been working in project management, to make sure it's coming up right. Working in project management for 17 years, and before that 20 plus years in supply chain management. I have a number of industry certifications. I have a master's in business, in international business, and a lot of years experience in contract management, public tendering, earned value management, which is how we assess whether we're actually delivering what we need to in a timely manner, and strategic procurement. I worked for clients such as everything from the District of Seashelt to the Department of National Defense in Ottawa. So I've covered organizations of every size you can possibly imagine. I'd like my associate Paul to introduce himself, and then we'll carry on with the presentation.
My name is Paul Warren. I've been in supply chain management for over 30 years now, and both the public and private sectors. And I'm certified purchasing professional and supply chain management professional in Canada and the United States. And a lot of my work has been done with various municipalities, especially over the last 10 years, consulting with City of Calgary, City of Airdrie, currently working with the AUMA in Alberta, to work with a lot of their members, which are municipalities as well. And a lot of the work I've been doing has been with business process analysis and design, strategic procurement, contract management, and sustainable procurement as well.
In September, Mr. Mehta asked us to come out and take a look at the core services review that you had done and evaluate how we could move you forward in the supply chain area. Procurement was pointed out as needing some work, and he wanted to get a handle on the details. So I came out for 5 days, interviewed most of the key directors and some of the senior managers, got a sense for what they were concerned about. Had a meeting with the supply chain staff, the purchasing and the stores people, so I could understand their perspective. And Then I reviewed some documents that apparently had already been prepared. There was a draft policy that was referred to in the core services review. I took a look at that. It consists of 15 sections, but there's some key ones I'd like to bring to your attention today because they are part of how we're going to move this thing forward. Responsibilities, there we go. Responsibilities and organization. It's an overview of who's going to do what, the chain of authority, and how things should flow through the organization. Application section deals with what the activities, with what activities are and what are not covered by the policy. Exemptions, which talks about when it's acceptable to not follow the policy. And there are some specific exemptions addressed in the Auditor General's information in the Local Government Act and some of the other legislation that applies. Exclusion of vendors, and that does not mean you get to say I don't use Bill because I don't like Bill. It's understanding the circumstances under which you can legally exclude somebody. And an example of that would be if they're already in a lawsuit with the city. You should not be using somebody who's already fighting with you about something else. Contract.
It's a good federal government law.
Yes. It has covered all levels of government, and I think it's a good one. Contract term. It'll talk about what are the permissible length of contracts and extensions. There is no such thing as an open or indefinite contract under current legislation. There are other terms or other vehicles that allow us to use something similar to that. This will help us define what the tools are and what the rules are around them. And then reporting. That'll tell us when and on what administration will report procurement activities to council. So that'll make it clear to everybody on both sides of the game what the responsibilities are. You will know what to expect and when. Administration will know what they're expected to report and when they need to do so. So that helps to clarify some things that we found were missing in the existing policy. So let's turn to the core services review. In the core services review, and in my review, there were some gaps we identified. There is an overlap of guidance on procurement policies and procedures, that being the policy document versus the procurement manual. Some things were in both documents. Some things were in the incorrect document, given the instructions that they were trying to provide. Current staffing plan is not able to provide effective purchasing support for city departments. You currently work on a decentralized basis, and only a couple of the people doing purchasing are actually trained in purchasing. So we felt that you're not getting effective traction in getting things procured the way you ought to. The purchasing manual policies and procedures do not adequately support your city staff. They do not provide enough guidance. They do not provide correct guidance in some spots. So that's something we would be addressing. There were a number of opportunities to improve value and resource utilization which you miss with the current decentralized purchasing, again because of a lack of training and understanding and knowledge. Lastly, we noticed that the purchasing knowledge transfer, the communication channels, and the training needed for all staff to support collaboration for end-to-end purchase management was missing. People are doing things on their own because they believe they know the best way to do it without necessarily having adequate guidance and without having adequate purchasing support to make sure that they're doing things legally, ethically, and fairly for the city. So what that did was brought up some opportunities. We believe, based on our study, that you need to update the purchasing policy and procedures, also referred to as SOPs or standard operating procedures. We need to redefine the purchasing organization. It's currently decentralized. We, at first glance, feel we should probably move towards a centralized organization, but that will be subject to discussion and study. There's obviously different opinions throughout the organization, and the goal is not to impose a specific structure, but more to bring in a structure that supports you guys better. So we would be interviewing more staff, certainly at the management and director level, to be sure that we're meeting the needs of the organization, and then we would propose a structure that would do that. We need to develop standard purchasing processes and tools, including standard templates. One of the things I noticed in September was that there were multiple different forms of contract documents out there, not necessarily effective ones either. So then we would look at that and give you standard processes, a cleaner policy obviously, and then come up with tools. Some of the tools we've used before are ways to evaluate the vendors. When you get a vendor evaluation, how do you decide who's the winner? There are ways to do that. They can be made consistent across the organization. Therefore, the results are consistent, explainable, fair, and as accurate as you can make them when you're relying on subjective opinions. Obviously, if you're going to create all this stuff, you have to train people in how to use it. So that would be one of the steps as well. And then identify opportunities for aggregating purchases. And those are big words, but what I mean by that is, as an example, office supplies. Every department in the organization procures their own office supplies. Is that necessarily a good value for money proposition for the city? Not necessarily. So we'll look at things like that and find out if we could put out one contract for the whole city for office supplies and everybody just draws on it. So those are the kind of things we're looking for, ways to improve the value that you get for the money you spend, make sure that we're buying the right things from the right people at the right time and the right cost, and all of those elements which are part of making sure that your procurement policy is supporting the city's activities. I'm going to let Paul talk in a little more detail about the opportunities.
Okay, so one of the first things we want to do is take a look at those policies and procedures and your processes. We're going to sit down and work actually with your staff to do that. So we're going to get their input, their ideas, so that we can come up with that governance and effective ways of using your municipal funds. So when we do that, the result of that's going to be these purchasing procedures, techniques that are going to be used consistently across the organization. So you folks have trust and understanding that this is how work is being done at the municipality in terms of how we're buying our purchasing activities. It's going to be fair, open, and transparent processes. So it is, these are public, they're available to the public to see how you're actually running your operations. The purchases will be made, they'll be compliant with the trade treaties and legislation that's out there. And also, because we are working with your staff, we expect that their input will enable us to come up with efficient and effective operations. It's not a cookie cutter type policies, it's something that's customized to you folks. We're going to build that management organization or supply management organization that's focused on services to the departments. And by doing that and centralizing some of the view that we have of the purchases, we're able to reduce those purchasing cycle times, which are very important to a lot of your departments. They want to make sure that it's not taking long times to get the purchases through. It improves your purchasing value or power as well, which in turn relates to the value that you get from your purchases. We can do that through consolidation. When we start looking at the organization and filling in all those quantities and the requirements that might be common throughout the city, then we can actually consolidate those requirements. Purchasing resources, when we see purchasing centrally, we can also apply resources to a lot of those requirements that you have in purchasing, such as staffing, your systems, and your training. So that would improve the services as well. And then we also want to look at managing, as Stuart mentioned, the vendor and contracting processes, so that we can be fair and just to the vendors, build solid vendor relationships that are going to support your operation, as well as working with that community so they can understand the opportunities and how to gain access to those opportunities. And then we'll look at the elevating the supply management knowledge and expertise across the corporation. A lot of organizations, if they just look at purchasing as a department, they lose the opportunity that other people have knowledge and expertise in other areas that could help them actually improve value for their organization. So we want to make sure we look at the internally and train those folks on what we can do to improve value for the city. We also want to go out and work closely with your suppliers and your contractors so that they can also provide some input, collaboration, and efficiency to your operation. So we're getting the best of all worlds to improve your value for the purchases and the funds that you're spending. We want to build the staff resources plans. We want to be able to accommodate the growth in the city, as well as utilize the staff during those peak work times, and also manage some of that stress. But one of the things we want to do is take a look at the staffing and the objectives of the staff and make sure that it's in line with the goals that you're trying to achieve for the organization. So it's a flow through of what's required. And through that we can manage those operational costs and get some cross-utility of the staff that you have. As I mentioned before, you also increase that ability to handle those peak loads periods of time, which I expect here probably in the summer. Some of it anyways. And then what we want to do is actually build a culture of collaboration and planning. Planning is very important in purchasing because we can actually, through strategies, cut down a lot of the cycle times, the purchase cycle times that you have for a purchase. And it also gives us time to take a look at what we're buying and putting some innovative approaches to them and getting some ideas from your staff to actually do that. In the long run, it's applying better techniques to getting better value for your organization. So again, it's bringing in the knowledge from all the resources that we have and making sure that we're applying that to best value.
Okay, so what are we proposing to do? By the middle of December, we would propose that we would have the policy document redrafted, ready for submission to you folks for review. We would hope you can turn that around fairly quickly. In the meantime, however, we would start to work on redefining the purchasing organization and staffing with an eye towards having that defined by January. Work on policies and procedures as well in parallel, and have that wrapped up by March. That one's going to be a little more consultative and collaborative, so it'll take a little more time to make sure we have all the correct input. Once we have those done, we can implement the policy and procedure at that level, and we expect to be able to do that by April. You'll notice a note there says RFX and template development. This is the standard documentation. RFX stands for request for whatever. Information, quote, tenders, all of those documents. Part of the difficulty we noticed is that there are so many different forms of documents that it's hard to tell what we're putting out. Standardizing the documents saves a ton of energy for everybody because they know what's already covered and what sections they have to work on. If we've covered all the legalese, met the trade obligations, then what we're focusing on is the technical requirements of the contract, and that's where the value add comes from the staff, as opposed to trying to figure their way through the legal muddle every time. Training and communication, we would have the plans for that done by April. The execution of that would take a little longer and would be part of the development piece that we see from May to July. So our goal is that we would be able by the end of July to have delivered to you the revised processes, procedures, and have everything in play that it's going to make the operations more effective, more efficient, and deliver better value for the city. That's the bulk of the presentation. If there's any questions, we'd be happy to entertain them at this point.
Thank you, gentlemen. Much appreciated. Stuart and Paul. I will just get the list started. Fine.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that we're going to get a copy of this presentation. Is that the case? Can we get one, please? Rather than me writing everything down, I was just assuming.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
There will-
okay.
I had expected, actually, there was a slide deck. I'm not sure where we miscommunicated, but to be made available.
Thank you.
Next one, Jim.
Poor procurement on that one. Didn't know that paper ready. That's my way of doing things. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. In 1995, the city started with the lawsuit de facto. We won't deal with you with hand syringa in the dirt pile on Uplands Drive. I made the motion. I think it's run its course now because the corporation has used that ability now to hinder or shut anybody up over my term. I've seen this in 20 years. So that lawsuit de facto thing concerns me now when you can say, well, just sue us and then we won't talk to you anymore. And that's problematic for me in a democratic society. So maybe I'll bring that motion back again. Procurement, and we lack skills, I've heard. We lack guidance and rules. We have ineffective contracts. We rely on subjective opinion. I never heard anything about stores or the ability to have that. So in your procurement management, do you consider the fact that if I have valves on stock, I don't have to wait for them to be delivered, and costing in that too? Because we reduced our stores down. And from my perspective, the big corporation stores are a good one. So that is one question. So on the stores. And then the opportunities, I appreciate the fact current staff is involved and we're switching from a divisional or individual to a centralized purchasing on this. Standard documentation is another question. During emergency management, the British Columbia, BSIMS, they've taken the R out of it, they have a standard set of documents for procurement. And typically you have some signed up in advance for your emergency social services. And they're typical provincial government documents that we have to fill out to meet their needs. Have we standardized any of those towards that type of broad-based, simple management structure across the organization? When you considered that, have you considered that?
Had not, but it's not uncommon for an organization to have two sets of documentation, if you will. One for standard day-to-day use and emergency operations.
So that's my point too, is that those should be trained equally,
Yes.
or at least to look at, because there's always opportunity to lose money when you screw up with the government orders. So thank you. On the stores issue, what would be the situation in the stores? We're ordering for the whole organization, then would you suggest a clearinghouse for everything, for all the papers and that to store it?
It's going to depend on the items. And I mean, Paul and I both worked in that part of supply chain as well. Stores was not addressed specifically in this, but yes, it's part of the study we would be doing. Deciding what items to keep in stores and how much is going to be a very iterative discussion. We might start out with a starting recommendation, but it'll be based on talking to the staff and finding out what do you really need. Do you have things that are in stores that don't need to be because they're commonly available? They may be 30 years old, but if they're for a valve you've got in the ground somewhere and you need parts when you need parts, you still might want to keep that. So we understand the balance between those things, and we will be looking at it.
Okay, thank you. I think on the trade agreements for me are one that, like I say, I prefer to spend every penny locally that's raised locally and fight trade agreements. I mean, it was very interesting that a 3 million person group in Belgium could hold up the comprehensive economic trade agreement, and yet 3 million people in BC couldn't. So our government didn't protect us the same way the Wallonians were protected. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Ms. Samrat and then Jerry Hong, and order whether you'd like to get back on.
Thank you. Did you guys actually look at, I think when we actually get
tenders out to build a building or to do a contractor to do road work, who supplies that product? Is that in the contract that the builder or the supplier is going to provide all the pipe, or do we as the city provide the pipe and they just install it?
You can define that contract by contract.
So, in your perspective, what should we be doing? If we're talking about contracts in mass quantity and centralized, isn't it better that we be the general, we supply everything to that build their, what's the typical procedure in organizations, I guess, this
There is
size?
no typical procedure, Councillor. It really depends on who you're contracting with, what their purchasing power is, what sources of supply they have, what the item is. Some things you may decide it's more effective for the city to provide those things. Sometimes you may decide it's more effective for the contractor to do so. And you have to assess that on a case-by-case basis. That's part of the contract negotiation management that we would expect to see.
It's also something that we'll look in purchase planning, when I mentioned that.
Yeah.
So you have strategies that you develop for your organization, your purchasing organization, and then you also develop purchase strategies for a project in a lot of cases as well, and that would include taking a look at that kind of thing. Who's going to supply what?
Yeah, because where I'm getting at that is, I think we've had a discussion that I think the water holding tank there is, we don't need a Cadillac. We need a Ford. And when we tender out a contract, just because we say we have $3 million, and my biggest problem is it comes at $2.99 million. Always. And then we get this Cadillac, well, we could have done this for 2.5.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm saying is, where do we have say in this to get it down to what the city needs that's functional, but it doesn't need to be that extent. That's the question.
So,
Sorry. Did you want to, Jerry, are you finished?
No, I'll
Yeah.
defer to Mr. Bennett, and then I'm going to make a couple comments on the core services review of procurement and priority the council needs to make of it.
so the decision on what's going to be built, what's going to be bought, is made way earlier than when you get to going out to the market to buy. Somebody saying go buy the iPhone 7. And so part of the planning piece that precedes that, I think, is where we will need to have a more fulsome conversation through the budget process. And as you set your budget amounts that you're putting out, that sets kind of like what you can actually buy.
Thank you, Mr. Lima. Tracy,
So,
you're up.
in the core services review, the consultants say that probably our greatest efficiency that the city of Nanaimo can achieve after spending $250,000 on the core services review is a revamp of our procurement. And it could be as much as 10%, is that the right amount, per year, which is $6 or $7 million. You could do no other fix and achieve the greatest efficiency of Nanaimo is a procurement strategy. But it is not as simple as bringing in these experts. They're going to validate it and make it possible and make this happen. But this is something that has to be carried out and led by council as a narrative for this community, because it requires fundamental corporate culture change, which means throughout this organization, all of us have a prominent role to play in making sure we're designing the right thing and that it's implementable, and that we monitor and enforce the implementation of it so we can achieve these efficiencies. Nothing excites me more than this work and what it can do for our city. It, to me, is the most fundamental change that we can make. We can close centers, we can do other things, but this is the big one. This is the one where we need all of you out there every day saying, this is something we need done, this is something we want, this is something we need you to enforce. We need your leadership, I need your support, staff needs the professional expertise to provide us that support so that we can do it. So for me, this is huge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anything else? I just have a question or two and then a comment. Could you please define for me when you mentioned earned value management?
Sure.
Could you just sort of expand on that a little bit for me, please?
Sure. If you look at the project plan for any project, it is forecast to take 6 months, let's say. Over the course of that, you have milestones. And against every milestone, there's a level of effort applied. Earned value management says, if I've already charged you 20% of the cost of the project, have I delivered 20% of the value? So you're making sure that people aren't billing other than, I mean, there's a little give and take, but you have to make sure you're getting value for what you've already paid. So it starts with the procurement planning, because you have to think about how do I structure that to be sure I get value for every dollar I'm spending. But this is a tool for measuring whether you're getting the value. And it's used in everything from consulting engagements to construction projects.
Thank you very much. This subject matter for me, this is what the core services review was and is all about, from my perspective. And I did have a question in a perfect world, your 5 opportunities, how long would this sort of take to deliver? And you answered that question by April, I think, or sorry, July in its completion. And my question is, we're going through a budget cycle now, and if there's, you spoke to staffing, and you spoke to training, and you spoke to a few things, and given the significance of this, the importance, the most important, potentially the most important core service review topic, is this something that we can deal with during our budget cycle? To make sure that we get the full value in 2017 when the information is complete to us in July? Because I don't know that these gentlemen know what our budget cycle is or even care. So anyway, I hope my question is kind of clear. Victor, can you help me out? Can somebody help me with that?
Sure. So there's 2 phases to the budget implications. The first one would be the hard costs that we need to invest to do some changes. We are working through those, and we would feed them through the cycle between now and December, if there are staffing changes and stuff like that. So we'll flow those through the COO's office for recommendation to council. Then the bigger savings that we referred to by the CEO, those would become a result of the changes that we make. So you would see those probably reflected in the bid values that you get as you go forward. And so as Councillor Holmes said, where all of a sudden somebody knew that you had $3 million and it always comes at $2.9 million. If we changed our process, you should be able to see that coming at $2.4 million. And so you would see those changes reflected probably on the surpluses or things going forward. You will have an adjustment year, and probably 2017, 2018 will be the adjustment years. But you have to look at it from those 2 perspectives. The hard ones, where we need to invest some money, we'll flow those through the budget cycle now. The actual benefits of the 5 million, 6 million, 8 million, you'll see those probably over a 2-3 year period.
Thank you very much. Well, this is a case where invest money to save money, and that's what the core service review is all about, not just drastic cuts. Stuart, you did mention value for money, which I like to hear, and Paul, you said improve value for the city, which I like to hear, and then make operations more efficient, effective for our city to operate in. So that's music. Thank you very much. Jim or does anybody have any questions before we let the gentleman go? Jim?
Well, yeah, you mentioned on the staffing and the ability to, I think one of the slides about the future, building staff resources plans to accommodate growth and staff utilization. Through your discussions with staff and that, if we have individuals now doing it or divisional doing their purchasing, or even branches out in those divisions, is there enough staff now in their purchasing? If everybody's doing some purchasing in an apartment, that should mean there's a bunch of purchasers out there. And like you said, they didn't always have the skill set. So the growth of that you centralize, would that mean the same staffing requirements?
this is an initial impression only. But based on what I saw in September, you may have the correct number of staff, but they're not trained, so we can work on that. They're not necessarily in the right organizational chain, but that's a decision you guys have to make. They may stay deployed in the department and report to procurement, who will be their hardline boss. Those are things we'll figure out as we talk to the staff and figure out what the actual requirements are and what's the best way everybody's needs to deploy them. But those are considerations we have thought of. You may have the exact right number of people, it's just, are they deployed correctly? And we'll figure that out.
Thank you. Excellent presentation, Tom. Appreciate it.
I don't have any questions, but I did want to say that this is a very interesting presentation, and I do believe, as Ms. Samra said, that this is a real pivotal one in terms of our organization. I think when organizations grow, a lot of times things just happen. Things get taken for granted. People do it because nobody else is doing it, whatever. And at this stage of the game, clearly we need to reset. I'm really looking forward to the results of your work over the next months, because I think that's when we're going to get some of the answers that we want to what is moving around in our head right now. I've got several points that I don't think there's any point in asking you right now, because it's all part of the work that you're going to be doing. So I'm really excited about this, and I do appreciate your presentation, and I'm looking forward to getting some good results that are going to make a difference to the city. So thank you for coming this morning.
Thank you. I think summed that real well. Victor, do you, just to close, do you have anything that you want to?
No, thank you. We will go ahead and implement.
Thank you, gentlemen. Motion to receive the presentation, please. Thanks, Buzz. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Mayor.
Moved by Wendy, Councilor Bryant. We have to be official, well, I know motions, but can I say Wendy instead of Councilor? Moved by Wendy,
I got
seconded
to
by...
think about that.
Seconded by Gordon. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation. I'll just remind everybody too that all of this information, if you forget yours or misplace it or something, it's all going to be put in this binder and it's going to be left in our counselor's office. So if you need, and please don't take it. Just don't take it. And if you do, just leave a note.
Why do you look at me?
Put a sticky note if you take it, so that you know somebody's got it or something. Great. Okay. We go to terms of reference 6A, and the recommendation, the approval of the edited draft terms of reference. The recommendation is that the committee recommend that the terms of reference for the Finance and Audit Committee be forwarded to Council for adoption. Victor, would you like to introduce this to us at all?
Thank you, through the chair. What you have between pages 6 and 7 is not red-lined, but if you're looking to see what changed from the last, I would draw your attention to page 4, item 4. These are the minutes from last time, the changes that were made. So under the committee investment matters include licenses and non-market licenses and leases. Under membership, remove non-voting advisory members, so that's been removed. Under the term, change cumulative to consecutive. And under financial matters, add investment portfolio. So those are the changes as per your direction last time. And so the document that's now in front of you on pages 6 and 7 reflects those changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Council's pleasure.
Move them.
Oh, apologies. Sorry. Mary?
Because of the change to the membership, eligibility and term also changed because it would just be cancelled.
Is that?
Yes, right.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Move the recommended Finance and Audit Committee terms of reference.
Forwarded to Council for adoption. Thank you. Seconded by Council Fuller. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question, please. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 6. Wait a second. So we go into administration. My apologies. 7A. The title is Business Continuity Plan, and the purpose is to provide information on the development of the city's business continuity plan and budget implications. The staff's recommendation is that the Finance and Audit Committee recommend that Council approve allocation of $125,000 for development and implementation of the citywide business continuity plan, and once again, I'll turn that over to Victor to introduce.
Thank you. Through the chair, the business continuity plan, I think we've talked about in the past, recommended through the Watson report, referred to in the IT review, operational review, as well as the security one, and also some mention in the core service review. So we are moving forward with this. We went through a process of requesting for qualifications, and we got 6 proponents respond, and we narrowed this down to 3, and we spent some time looking at who would do this best for us, and we ended up with MNP LLP. They have their national office out of Toronto who is going to work through this project through the local office. The idea is to have an across the organization business continuity plan. We have a somewhat solid emergency management plan that's looking outside, and this would look inside and interface with the outside looking piece. And I had a couple of questions from a number of people asking, if we have the emergency plan, why do we need the business continuity plan? And I said the emergency side of it looks at what we do as a city to make sure that our citizens are safe and we continue to provide access to roads and stuff like that. But for instance, if we're looking at business continuity, we're looking at how we serve them from City Hall and from other services that we provide. And a good example is this building. If for some reason we cannot have access to this building, so where else could we direct our residents to go pay their business licenses to interface with us? So that aspect is what is dealt with here. And how do we communicate that with our staff? How do we communicate with members of the public and things like that? So that's what this is going to be covered. We have some plans across the organizations that were developed a couple of years back. And what we didn't do back then was to test them and also to work out dependencies between departments. A good example is the plan that I have in finance says if there is an emergency and we cannot work from this building, IT would provide 9 laptops. So I went over to IT one day and said, so where are my 9 laptops? They said, what are you talking about? Why do you need 9 laptops? So I was just simply testing if we had worked through the kinks of dependencies and stuff like that. So going through this process, we'll do this across the entire organization. From a structure, you would have it the same way structures as you have with emergency services. So there's a governance overlay on it. So who calls an emergency? How do we communicate with our staff? Where do we send them? How do we communicate with our residents as to how we are providing that service if they cannot have access to the normal channels? Thank you.
Have you given an example of, I'm late to the conversation, so I apologize for this, but we have business continuity plans for the Ministry of Aboriginal Relations and for Indian Affairs. And the business continuity plan is for operations. So if there's an epidemic, a pandemic, and everybody's sick, what are the essential services that the city needs to provide to its employees and to the community? So things like payroll, so people continue to be paid while they're in a pandemic. I know this is an odd example, but we did have pandemics coming out. We had to deal with those about 10 years ago. So what are the essential services for the employees, and what are the essential services for the community? Being able to have people that are going to do if there's a sewer or water burst. It's about the essential services for the community to continue to live in a decent state and for employees to continue to have services that they need as employees. And so usually payroll, that's mostly the one internal one. And then externally, we have to make a determination what is the minimum. If everybody's sick and the whole community's in a pandemic, who's going to make sure we have water, flushing toilets, and basic essential services?
And fire departments and police officers and everything that goes on.
Thank you. I have word for order, and then I have Jim. And if after Gord speaks, if I could have a motion so that we can deal with the staff recommendation.
Okay, a couple of things. First off, if we get the payroll thing working right, we can do that through emergency. Let's send that off to the federal liberals. Where are we going to get the 125,000 K from for the report? what part of our budget is that coming from?
Okay, as of now, we are asking that we allocate this from our general reserve.
Thank you.
If I could have a motion, please, and then we can deal with put a motion on the floor so we're speaking to it. Go ahead and moved by Wendy, second by Jerry. Now for discussion, please.
Well, we have to identify what is chaos, what is basic, and what is full services in our operation. And it is called an emergency response and recovery plan. And typically the business continuity plan is based on recovery as well as immediate operations. And if every department is not identified by now, their basic operations, I'm a bit disappointed. Just going to say, I'm a bit disappointed. Telecommunications would be a horrible failure where people could get stuff done. I see it now. We've got computers down here. Do we have forms to fill out? Paper forms? No, we don't. Go ahead, Victor. I've been 10 years at this. You've been a year.
Go ahead.
Right? So from my point of view, we did work on response and recovery plans, and they just never get instituted because we don't have a disaster. At the earthquake drill the other day, people walked out in the parking lot and they had no idea what they would do in the event of a disaster. No idea. I saw guys walking up the street with a truck. They could care less because we haven't been struck with a disaster. We've been extremely lucky, extremely fortunate. So from my perspective, I'm happy we're doing this, but I'm not certain why we always have to bring in a consultant to do our work. Because a consultant doesn't, like we heard a quarter of you guys come, they don't know our community. And I think this should be a departmental costing, should be divided up. They should be able to, if they can't create a continuity plan, I'm not certain they will follow one. From my view, continuity is something you must do in your business to consider it will continue. Everything Jerry does is just for today and tomorrow and the day after his business, right? It's what's the chaos, what's going to happen in chaos? What's our family reunion plan is part of a business continuity plan. So who's got the little kids and who's going to run home because they haven't taken care of their family? What's our basic operation? What do we need? Water, food, shelter. It's our basic operation this community has to provide. And debris removal and garbage and that comes in. So this is really disappointing to me that this is now funding, but I'm really happy that it's being done. But it sure has taken a lot of millions of dollars to get to this point. And I'm not certain what staff would say right now to make me feel good.
Well, I want to differentiate, Chair, if I may. Can I differentiate between emergency management and BCP? A BCP is really a corporate operations, corporate document. So when our internet went down, what was our game plan? We didn't have one. When it went down again, we didn't have one. Now we will have one. If our pay system goes down, the software gets corrupted, what's our game plan? So BCP overlaps with emergency management, but it's more focused on operations of this organization. If this building burns down, how are we going to continue to run the city? If our computer systems are corrupted, how are we going to continue to run the city? If there's a catastrophe at the yard, how are we going to run the city? So we're more focusing on things that could go wrong that interrupt our ability to run the city, rather than the larger ones in the EM where there's an earthquake, a flood, major fire, all those types of things. So it's a narrower focus, and it's a corporate document, and usually it rests within the corporate officer area. It used to rest with finance. It hasn't been operationalized, and I think given the volume of what we're doing, sure, if we had time and resources, we could have somebody go around and do this, but I think it's essential enough for me, having had 2 computer systems shut down and no instructions on what to do. It's like really easy, leave the building and pick up Wi-Fi somewhere else, and you're able to continue to communicate. But we need something internally that allows us to be able to continue. This is a comfort level so that we can continue to operate the city. So it's just sort of, if you differentiate it and have that little overlap with the EM and understand that this is more of a procedure operations thing.
You're totally wrong, but I can disagree with you.
Yeah.
Totally disagree with you. It's part of the emergency response for our community. I would, honestly, I can't support a motion. We're spending another $125,000 on stuff that should have been in for 10 years now. There's some culpability to get it done now. And we look like fools every time this happens and something screws up and we can't get anything done and people are sitting down. This computer stuff has gone on for years. There's
Okay.
culpability. That's why I'm disappointed. I can't vote for this, but I will vote for it. And I'm telling you, the separation of a business continuity plan from our community, from what have you identified as disasters for a business continuity if it doesn't come from your emergency plan? The hierarchy of documents is confusing, really confusing to me.
I agree on that. It should
If I
be-
may, I'm just going to interrupt. I have 2 more speakers that have asked to speak. I'll come back around to anybody else that wants to address anything that they've heard that they wish to comment on. And that's why I'm glad this recommendation is on the table. So I have Gord, and then I have Wendy, and then I'll come back to Jim again. Thank you.
So I totally agree with, well, I don't totally agree with Councillor Kidd, but I do agree with Councillor Kidd. And actually, he mentions we should have had something like this 10 years ago. We should have had something like this 20 years ago. And that's been one of the problems ongoing over the years. When I look at some of the stuff we're doing like this, for me, this is the legacy we are leaving for the next council. And on and on and on. We're actually picking up some of the pieces that have been lost over the years, reinstituting them, and I think it will make a better corporation overall, not just with this, but with the last, the procurement, some of the other stuff. For me, this is a legacy I can live with more than I can with a thing like the VICC. I couldn't give a rat's ass about the, excuse me, I keep swearing.
We need to stay on the topic of the
So I am quite glad we are doing this, and I will support the motion because unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, I don't think we have the staff capacity at this point to do this. We might have updated in the future, but right now I don't think we do. Thanks.
Thanks, Wendy, and then Jim.
So I think the reason we did the core review was to find out where we were lacking. And we're lacking in several areas, and this certainly is one of them. My question is, what have we done in the past? You know, in looking at this issue, is there pieces that have been done, or is this completely lacking at this point in time and we're starting from square one with it? Because that's just a piece I would like to know. I can't believe that we're the first ones to think of this, that we've never had any discussions about, and when I say we, I mean the corporate we. Is there evidence of any information out there that work has been done on this already? And all that would do is inform us as we move forward, but you know, I mean, I think one of Councillor Kipp's presentations, and I can't talk for him, but I remember after the supposed emergency that we were going to have around wind and rain for 3 days, and it didn't quite materialize, and then Councillor Kipp made some comments in our briefing just around were these things followed? They have been in place in the past, and we obviously didn't follow them. And I think you were talking about some forms, Councillor Kipp. I can't remember everything because I'm not aware of everything there. But what I'm saying is, I think we need to always, when we're doing this, and I'm assuming we are doing this, that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that we have some stuff already done, that would be incorporated, and that, you know, and that we continue to remind our staff on a regular basis of all the changes that we are coming down the pike, and all of that once they're in place, that we have some kind of exercises that we go through, so to remind staff, because we're constantly getting new staff, and people forget, they become complacent. I mean, it's like the big one, you know, nobody really believes it's going to happen in their lifetime. They sure as hell hope it's not going to happen in their life, and it probably will happen in our lifetime. But I hope it doesn't. But we become complacent, and I think it's really important that we move ahead with this, along with all of the other things, because clearly at this point in time, we don't have everything we need to move forward safely in terms of serving our city, in terms of emergency response, all those kinds of things. And if we do have a lot of information in place for emergency response, then shouldn't we just be reminding everybody to follow them, because maybe they weren't followed, maybe they were. So I think this is an important piece. I absolutely think this is an important piece, because if something disastrous occurs, even like a pandemic, where everybody in the city starts to get sick, and how do we manage this city? Because that is a very pivotal piece to making things, to not collapsing completely. It's a pivotal piece, I think, and I think 125,000 is small change, like
So
we
if
were
I might-
talking about
Thanks,
security.
Mike. Appreciate your words. Jerry hasn't spoken yet. He's on the list. And then I have Jim and then Trixie. You don't need to speak, but thanks.
Thank you. Some questions and I guess some comments. You know, I think this is all based out of the Watson report. When was Watson report done?
2013.
So this is a report that was done in 2013. So since then, we haven't implemented or budgeted anything to get the Watson report done. Is that correct? Well, this part.
This part.
So I see, you know, the way I'm looking at this is a 125,000 is hard for me to swallow, but it's not a report. It's a plan. So I'm distinguishing the difference between a report that should have been done in 2013, but it shouldn't have fallen on our table. That's the way I see it. It should have been done in the previous regime because it came out of the report, you know, it should have been implemented. So for us to implement that report, at least I could say that at least we're not doing another report. That's one good point. We're not spending money on another report, but then we're going to do this and spend another 125. So I think the Watson report is a valid report and it has some good information on it. And I think we should be following through with the majority of it. So I don't have a problem supporting this. We haven't already spent money on this, and then we're doing this again. That's just where my concern is. Spending this amount of money is never completed.
Okay, I need to get my question answered.
I can answer
Sorry,
these
but
questions,
I
both
didn't.
Councillor Pratt's and Councillor Holmes, because when I arrived, one of the things I asked for was our BCP, and we didn't have it. And then I know that two staff started to work on it. They worked on it for 8 or 9 months, but they didn't make much progress. So that's where I arrived at the conclusion where I can support the CFO's recommendation that we bring someone in to do it. And without getting into the details, there's two pieces of work going on simultaneously. Emergency management work with Karen and Craig and Brad, and it's the bigger scope of stuff. Again, I think the BCP is an operational document for us. Our hazards are different. BC doesn't get involved because our computer system's shut down. BC doesn't get involved because our building burns down. So it's like our own mini thing, but it's called a business continuity plan because that's how it's talked about in bureaucracies, and those are the functions. So we need to have the plan that what are our hazards? Computer systems going down, facilities shutting down, those types of things. That's what the BCP does. Then it'll overlap to the larger emergency things when we have other types of things happening within the community. But this one, our focus is I need to have a plan if our computer system shuts down. I need to have a plan if we have no internet, because that impacts operations at Parks and Rec. If the computer system shuts down, what it did on the day that people were signing up to register for courses, that impacts our revenues, that impacts our operations, that impacts everything. So it's a narrow focus operational thing for the bureaucrats. We haven't expended any money on it. I've been waiting for it for a year. It hasn't been created. For me, it's a priority in order to be able to run this city efficiently, responsibly, and minimizing our risk and our liabilities.
Did that respond to your question, Bernie? Just before we call the vote, my only comment is that Jerry didn't mention that we've already identified how much we're willing to spend on this publicly. And so assumedly it'll be $124,899 using Jerry's logic. So,
we already did it. MMP's already.
well, but we have to move this up to council. So approve the allocation of that amount is what how the motion reads. So I'm assuming this comes to council. And we've already done this?
No. So where we are, we've gone through a request for qualifications, we've gone through the negotiations, and once this is done, it's an award. So we're going through. So there's no more negotiation on prices. That's all done. So at this point, what we're asking is your recommendation for this committee to council to allocate the 125, and then we move along.
Because that's the established amount that is going to come.
We didn't go for RFP on that.
In any event, I don't want to get into that I'll avoid getting into that conversation, so I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
After the walkthrough, we want the floor.
I'll vote.
Just, not that it's probably, I don't think we'll get there, but I do have to leave at 11:15. I have another appointment at 11:30. It'll take me 15 minutes to get there, so. We have item B, 7B, and this is the financial plan review. This is the unfinished business that I mentioned at the beginning. And this is, Victor, if you would like to take over from here, please.
Thank you. Through the chair. So last time we kind of like rushed through the overview, and we want to somewhat tie that to our discussion today. So what Deborah and I are going to try and do is to bring you back, at least in our minds, to where we are in terms of planning for the budget. We'll do the overview, maybe slightly quicker, but we want to spend a little bit more time on two funds, the sewer fund and the water fund, because they drive our user rates, and we'd like to bring the user rate file at our next meeting on November 15, and so we'll spend more time on that. And we are not going to talk today about general capital projects. We are going to spend an entire meeting dedicated to general capital projects on November 16th. So I can set that up for the committee members. And so we'll provide you the list of projects, the funding models and the sources for the November 16th, and we'll spend that time doing that. So today we'll do the overview, and then we'll spend time on the sewer and water funds as focused areas, and then take that from there.
Okay, so quickly summary, overview, water, sewer funds, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Can I ask, just for a moment? I keep a lot of this stuff, some don't, but if we could have dates on who wrote it, what department or whatever, and a master file, and I'd really appreciate this. It just to be easier, and so that when I know I get a more current one, I can put the date, fire it. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
It'd be nice for me to organize my brain.
Good idea.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the package in front of you, there is a, first of all, a sewer summary sheet for operating, and I'm going to stand up so you can see me, and a sewer project list. And then there's also a water summary sheet for operating and a water. So we're going to look at the sewer first. Okay, there should be three there.
Oh, there it
You'll
is.
have four.
Sorry, missed it.
Okay. So we're going to look at sewer first. So first of all, just recap, sewer and water are standalone funds, standalone utilities. So every year we collect user fees for sewer and water. Those user fees are meant to cover annual operating and maintenance costs. And they also contribute to reserves for infrastructure renewal, standalone. Okay, right now what we're doing is we have annual increases to water fees and sewer fees. For sewer, the annual increase for 2017 is 5%, and this is for asset management. This is to go to those infrastructure renewal reserves. And then it drops to 4% for the next 3 years after that, and then it's finished according to our current bylaw. Yes.
Thank you. Did you want, I should have asked you, do you want questions at the end of the sewer presentation, or as we go?
What are you most comfortable with?
I think I would like them to be at the end. So if you guys want to hold on to your questions till Deborah's finished the sewer delivery, and then we'll, that's.
Absolutely. Okay, so focusing on sewer operating, you've got an overview here of the level of service. No real changes. Are you okay?
Not
Okay. So what happens with the sewer operating is the managers look at their work plans for the new year. They look at if there's been any significant changes. We look at expenditure history and see if we need to make any changes to budgets. In sewer, really no changes. The programs have essentially stayed the same. This is for annual operating and maintenance. And you'll see there that the increase is what is it there, very much, less than $100,000. That doesn't include wage increases. So as we go through the budget review process this year, because the QB contract ends in 2016, none of the changes in expenditure budgets will reflect wage increases. We budgeted for that in contingency. So here, that's sewer operating, and over here is the projects. And you may want to look through there. So just to bring your attention to up probably about line 4, you'll see a $400,000 annual budget there, and that is for condition assessment program. As you work down into this next section of the project list, these are the capital projects, mainly renewal. You will also see some of the projects in the description will start DCC. And those are projects that address growth per the current bylaw, DCC bylaw. And those tend to be the larger projects. You're also going to see, and you'll see this again in water and in general, projects that start at DCC. And that is our new projects that we have in the, that have come out of the DCC review that we're still about to complete, and we'll be bringing it to council in early 2017. Okay, but they're in the plan now. They are to address growth, and I have all those in here, and Lois who can speak to that. Did you want to bring anybody's attention to any larger projects, Paul?
I wanted to question on DCC.
Sure.
Lily Valley's still in there, in these figures. All the development for Lily Valley and the DCC charges for that development is still in the current DCC plan.
There's been no change.
So what I'm saying is, we had DCC projects slated to run the road all the way through Lily Valley. That's been in the project for 20 years now. So that 100-line road and all that. So that's still, some of those projects are still in our DCC budget, I understand.
Okay, and we can look at those when we do the general review at the next meeting, because that's for transportation. So DCC.
Well, but there was water pipes and sewer pipes
and
that
water.
go those too. So, but I'm just asking.
Yeah.
I
That
think
hasn't
there's-
been taken out for when we bought the property, how many years ago? When did we buy Lily Valley?
3 years ago.
3 years ago. So the DCC list is still the same as that. That's all I'm asking.
Yes, it is, now the current bylaws.
So that we should be able to reduce some of that DCC list because we're not developing that area. That'll come up. Thank
So-
you. Sorry. I just wanted to-
Would anybody else like to comment on that question or comment?
So just a question around, are there sewer DCCs within that? I mean, I think the DCC bylaw hasn't changed. Certainly staff aren't putting any sewer DCCs for that in the plan here. And when the new DCC bylaw is adopted, those projects will be
They'll be removed. How will that, do you think, now you said that, how will that affect our DCC valuation? Because we were looking to take a lot of road, that whole green strip right through there, the big chunk in Nanaimo. How would that, will that be able to bring our DCC value down? Victor?
So the process of setting the DCC rates is driven by the projects we want to do. So if there are things that we are not going to do that we thought we would do last time, you would naturally probably see a reduction, but also that's a function of what else do you want to do that's driven by growth. And so as we go through the report that we're bringing forward to council, we'll be able to show what are the future DCC or growth-driven projects and how they impact the rate. So as you see now, we're reflecting the current bylaw. That's going to change in Q1 when we bring them forward.
And are all of our assist factors the same across our DCCs?
They are not the
Water
same.
supply is 25%,
Yeah,
all of the
25.
other ones are currently 1%.
1% of the
That
other.
is
Water
correct.
still 25.
It is correct.
Thank you.
Did anybody else wish to speak? Jerry?
Are we done with the presentation? I was just waiting for it to finish. Are we done with sewer?
Well,
It's up to you.
we're discussing sort of.
Oh, okay, so we're done with sewer, so we can discuss it. I'm just trying to make sense of this and this. These are, we're grand total of 4.8 million. Where does that show up on
Okay,
this?
it doesn't, because this is annual operating and maintenance, and this is the projects.
So when you look at our revenues, I guess you're gonna apply that $3.3 million revenues to that 4.8
It does, it kind of goes
projects.
through. So what happens is net revenues goes into the reserves, and then they do come out to fund projects, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on how many projects we have in a year.
Okay, so that makes sense to me. The question I have is the 5% increase, would we be able to lower that by increasing our DCCs? Because the RDN just came to us and hit us up with higher DCCs for their projects for next year. And we haven't had the discussion about increasing DCCs to reduce. I'm not happy with the 5% increase. I'd like to get that lower by increasing DCCs. Could we then use that money we get from DCCs to apply to some of these DCC projects?
DCCs are for growth.
Yes.
Yeah, so
But-
and the 5% is for asset management, so it's for renewal of current infrastructure. Sorry, did you want to?
No, that's correct.
Okay, so it's two very different purposes. So that 5% again is for renewal of existing infrastructure. We're updating our long-term asset management plans for current infrastructure. We're going to bring that to you at the same time in January. So you'll be able to see both together, and then that's the whole picture.
Okay, so, but that's not for reserves, that's just renewal. So we're not actually saving any money for future, we're just, because you're
So
saying
what
5%.
happens? So we collect our DCCs.
Yes.
And we put them in the DCC reserve, and then we go out and build those projects.
Yeah.
So with our annual user fees, we collect that money. That money covers annual operating and maintenance and goes into an operating reserve for renewal of current infrastructure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that,
Yeah.
out of that 5%, how much is going into the reserve is my question.
For the annual operating reserve, it's about $3 million a year now, I think, or 2.7, because we've been increasing it since 2013, 5% each year. And I think the annual amount right now is about 2.7.
Okay, and then the capital projects that we're doing, does that come out of those reserves?
Everything comes out of reserve.
So then we're in a
it-
negative.
No, it either comes out of our annual operating reserves or out of our DCC reserves. And thank you, you brought up a very
Yeah.
good point. So we have a challenge with sewer projects. So what we have is our DCC projects in the draft plan, in our current DCC bylaw. No changes have happened since we passed that bylaw. We have not enough money in our DCC reserves to fund those projects. And we have been engineering services. We have to build those projects for growth that's happening right now. So what we are doing at this point is borrowing $5.2 million over the next 5 years to fund those DCC projects, and repayment will come from non-DCC reserves. So this is really important to understand. Okay.
Wouldn't it be better for increase the DCCs?
Well, this is a moving conversation. That's why we're giving you a heads up on some of the things. We've had a lot of meetings and discussions about how we're going to move. And as we go into quarter one, we're going to bring a lot more to you. This is just alerting you that we've got some challenges, and we're looking at ways to deal with them in an effective manner.
And what you're dealing with is what everyone else is dealing with when it comes to growth. So what happens, unfortunately, is when we plan for growth, and you say we're going to have community X with population Y, you get to population Y over time. But in the meantime, once you have some people living in that area, now you have to build the infrastructure ahead of your revenue stream, and that's a challenge that you're basically facing now. And like the CAO is saying, we are flagging this. We're coming back in Q1 to say, how else can we really deal with this? Because some of it is now impacting on the asset management side, impacting your current infrastructure, and that's a risk issue. And we have to kind of like get to a sweet spot as to what's tolerable. And for some things like sewer, and I'm not one guy who comes to say the sky is falling, but if it's sewer and if we're not managing it right, then you're going to have things popping up in wrong places, and that's not the service level that we want to deal with. So really, DCCs are always a challenge. And I think we are confident with the conversations we're having internally that we could come up with a somewhat viable option in terms of how we deal with this. I need to address the issue of the 5%, the asset management piece. That's really for your existing infrastructure. You want to keep that in good shape going forward. DCCs, that's your growth-related stuff. So if we start reducing this one so we can do the other one, really the other one, the DCC one, is not as sure. That's the challenging piece. You can reduce it all you want, but if the developing or the developer community is not hooking up, you kind of like have shot yourself in the foot. Okay.
Thank you. A complex subject. I was just going to ask the question, like 5% of what dollar value?
Okay.
And that's one question. And just another comment would be P6217 and P6219 are the Terminal Avenue South Utility Project. So it's $1,050,000 plus or minus. And I for 2017, and I'm just wondering what that is in relation. What is that upgrade that we're doing in the Terminal Avenue South Utility Project?
Okay, so on Terminal Avenue between Stewart Avenue and St. George, there's a number of utilities as well as the asphalt condition of the road. So staff have packaged up a project that includes water, sewer, storm, as well as road rehab. And so this sewer is just a piece of that overall utility project. That they'll see that corridor. Essentially, it's utility renewal. There's really no upgrade involved in that. It's really just asset management.
So because this is just simply specific and related to sewer, that project is considerably more than $1 million. This is just the sewer portion of that project.
Yeah, so there's a sewer portion, there's a water portion, there's a road rehab and asphalt portion. So there's quite a bit to that.
Thank you. Anything else? All right. Okay. Then I guess we go on to...
Sure.
Unless you have anything else that you want to...
No.
You have the question about 5%.
Oh, yes. 5%.
It is 1.1
It's almost 1.4 million for 2017. That's the contribution to the sewer.
So 5% of 1 point?
No, 5% equals 1.4 million of sewer fees.
So the question is, what's the X? 5
Oh.
X is, yeah.
It will be revenues generated is the 17.3 million, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Of which 5% of the 5% increase, it's actually accumulative since 2013, but in 2017 it will equal 1.4 million.
So, I'm sorry, I apologize. So I understand the cumulative because it was a compounding 1%, and then next year was 2, and next year was 3, next year was 4. When we implemented the asset infrastructure 1% 5 years ago, or however long ago it was. So is that how we get to 5%?
This is actually sewer, so it's been 5% each of those years. So what happened, Bill, is we took the base user fees in 2013 and we added 5% on there, and that went directly into the asset management reserve, and I'd have to look back to see specifically what that number was. And then in 2015, we added on another 5% and took both of those amounts and put them in the reserve that year. And then again the following year, another 5%.
And
So
we
that
still
ends
have
up
to
being
borrow $5.2 million even with all of these increases.
Yeah. Because this is for DCCs, this is for growth. So when we made those 5% increases in user fees, that was for renewal of current infrastructure, not for growth.
So if we are going to borrow, we are borrowing because our DCC's collection is not performing as planned. But all of a sudden, because we have opened this subdivision, we have to service that subdivision. And we have to put the sewer line in the ground, and that's the piece. So the 5% is on existing infrastructure.
Thank you. So to Jerry's point, we really need to look at the DCC contribution.
Yeah.
We are. It's a huge project, kind of jumping in Q1. And assumptions we made 10 years ago about growth and development and where this is going to happen at different periods isn't the same as it is today. So we're taking a look at everything. And that's Brad McCrae is going to be looking at that, and when Kim Fowler comes, she's going to be assisting with it as well. Because this is some heavy lifting on a whole variety of things, so we're hoping to get back in front of you in early 2017.
Thank you. Deborah, I guess you're still up.
Okay. So let's have a look at water. So again, here's your annual operating and maintenance, and these are the projects.
Unfortunately, I have to leave. Well, you're not making any decisions. It's-
Well, can we vote on these couple of reports just to receive them while we're here in front of us?
Yeah.
Can we do that? That would help on the water and the sanitary. And I guess it's the same explanation, I believe, because otherwise we won't be able to receive these into our minutes if we use a form.
Okay.
Am I correct?
I've left here tomorrow.
Yes.
Not that I want to get into the rules
Motion to receive.
and start a big battle.
So, thank you for that. So,
I'll make a motion that we receive
Jim, second by
water
Jerry.
and
My only question is, can we receive something that we haven't received yet?
Yeah,
We received their
receive our information.
I was not,
Sorry, I'm just trying to be as cautious
Yeah, no.
and careful as possible because we know what
Yeah.
comes tomorrow.
Yeah. Motion to receive for information.
Motion to receive for
So what is it that we're receiving for information?
These two reports.
Two written reports, the verbal supplemental, but you're receiving the written reports.
Motion to receive the written reports as presented and the verbal update.
You can't include that verbal update because not everybody will be here. So your motion is to receive the written reports.
Motion to receive the written reports as provided. Thank you. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
You could also make a motion to continue recording it so that the verbal may be videotaped. Yeah.
And
So a motion to continue.
so then a motion to continue with the recording of the balance of the meeting for viewing. So moved by Councilor Kim, second by Councilor Conlon. Any discussions? Call for it. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we just look at the annual operating and maintenance budget again. It increased by about $130,000 in expenditure, mainly due to materials and supplies. Meter maintenance was probably the biggest piece of that. And again, we caution you, no increases in wages here because that contract is completed. Again, we've increased our revenues, our user fees here by 7.5% for water fees. We've been doing this. We've been doing 5% increases for, gosh, when did we start? 2008. And that was out of that 25-year water supply plan. In 2013, we started another 2.5% increase to water fees each year, again going to those asset management reserve for renewal of current infrastructure. Here's the projects. And again, in water distribution and water supply, the water treatment plant, full year of operation this year, so really no changes, no significant changes in how they're delivering their services in 2017. Programs are still essentially the same. So in projects, you'll see a lot of projects, actually. You'll see at the top there, condition assessment programs. Certain studies that we have Paul, Bill, and Doris here that can speak to them. In the capital projects, again, majority of them are for renewal of existing infrastructure, and you'll see those DCC projects, and you'll see FDCC projects.
Thank you. Any questions? I just have a couple if I may, then if a lot of people are scanning. The Cinnabar project is just improvements. There's a couple line items, it's over $1 million, and the departure bay is over $1 million. That's just simply for water and not all the rest, the asphalt and all the other good things that are likely to follow in line with that.
This is just the water.
But yeah, so can you just give me a quick dashboard of what those are?
Those particular projects?
Yeah, just the Cinnabar one, because they're significant and well, maybe they're not significant, but in terms of dollar value, for 2017 they are. And then, well, it's okay, you don't have to tell me right now. And then just, my second question would be, when we speak to water conservation and toilet rebate programs and all that, in all of our city facilities, are they cycled out, the stuff that's not conserving water to the best of its ability? So whether it's toilets or urinals and all of those things, and sinks and taps, and that it might, so we're asking our community to please invest in the toilet rebate program and water conservation, latest and greatest washers and toilet flushes and all that stuff. Are we doing that? Like, do we do that? When an apartment is built or a condo is built, do we say, you're going to put in low flow flushing toilets? So it's just a question. It could be
I can
a
speak to
stupid
that
question.
if you're interested. So it's a good point. And it
Like you
sounds
say,
like a great idea.
just to save everybody the worry about asking stupid questions, I'll ask them all for everybody else. So nobody else has to worry about it.
No, I think it sounds like, hey, that's a great idea when you say it out loud. Because I think new facilities like this one have low flow toilets, low flow urinals, that sort of thing. Any new construction within the city is governed by the building code, the plumbing code, which requires low flow facilities now. So they're not subject to the rebate program. The rebate program focuses on old homes or whatever. And then last year, I think council increased the rebate program to include multifamily and commercial. So because we used to have only allowed for 2 toilets. And our facilities guys would be able to answer this the best, what the plan is for replacing fixtures within our facilities. But it's a good plan to say as we do as well, not just say, does that make sense?
It does. It does change. We have arenas and pools and all other kinds of theaters and things that people are using frequently. I'm sure there's some savings there. Thanks. No other questions? Okay, cool. Good. We're done. 30 employees in this department, and this 7.5% doesn't include, again, the wage thing. It's going to be somewhere else.
7.5 is the user fees not taken. Expenditures was actually about 1.8%.
Thank you.
Okay. And did you want to answer about the Cinnabar project? Because I think have it.
If you do, right?
Yeah.
Just stop. Yeah, please.
So it's a number of projects, and they're triggered by they're sort of concurrent with road rehab projects. So we don't want to, repave a road and then leave old sort of problematic utilities within the road. So whenever we do a road rehab project, or we're trying to do a road rehab project, we do a complete assessment of the utilities under the road. And so what happens is sometimes utilities pop up and we're like, hey, we should do this. So this is an example of a number of water mains that have had some water main break history. We've done some assessment on it. We believe it's a good thing to do before we do the road rehab.
Awesome.
So that's that one of the projects that's involved.
Thank you. Okay, we're good. Next.
That's it.
That's it?
Yes.
Come on. Can we just stick around and do some more? All right, then. A motion to adjourn.
You're allowed to make a motion to adjourn.
We've done it before.
That's going on.
So before you go, so
To adjourn?
on the 16th, we are going to provide you with the general capital plan, the project. Why I'm raising this is because those are the projects that actually impact the property taxes. So you want to spend some time really looking at those, their road projects, facility projects. So we'll send those up in advance of, so we won't show up with them on the morning of the meeting. We provide them as part of the package a week earlier so you can go through that. They will show the timing, 2017, 2021, and we can get, so we'll spend that whole 2.5 hours talking general capital projects.
And that's 16th?
That's the 16th.
Same time, same place. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody.